All right, welcome back to Philosophy from the Frontline. We have a new segment. It's called the Big Bites and PMI segment. And for those of you that don't know, that's kind of an inside thing for West Point. But we're going to start talking to graduates. I've talked to a lot of graduates, but I'm going to start talking specifically to my classmates to kind of pull a little bit more of the story and kind of build an oral history of some of the different things that we've done. Because our class was kind of a weird one. You know, there's a podcast out there. I'm going to plug them. They're called Through the Gray. It's from the class of 2001. And so they were the class that was in West Point when 9/11 happened. So they have a full podcast telling their stories, but, not a lot of stories being told about the class of 97. We're all getting towards the time where we actually can retire, except for those that are like at the senior tippy top folks that are probably going to hang around a lot more. And those are incredible people. And we will catch up with them when we get the chance. But today we have Steve Dullack, and reached out to the classmates, and he was the first one to jump on this grenade. So it's going to be interesting having a chat with him. But it's been years since we've literally seen each other. So it's kind of cool being able to have the interface, at least virtually, to talk to each other. But we'll start with the standard stuff. Give us your background, where you're from, what companies you were in, and what'd you do when you were at school.
Sure. Hey, and first of all, Rob, thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me on. I've listened to several of your podcasts, and even though I transitioned a long time ago, from the Army and then later from the Coast Guard, valuable stuff. So thank you for what you do. It's really important, and I'm glad you're doing it. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Southern California, in a little piece of paradise called Dana Point. Never knew growing up how good I had it. It really was. It was absolute paradise. 360 days of perfect weather a year. Just great place to grow up as a kid. Got accepted to West Point. I was in E1, and then I scrambled into D4. Like a lot of us, I still very close with the folks I went through plebe year with. I got a group of friends. Andy McKee, Jason Porter, Pete Bilone, Teddy Kleisner, Corey Brunkow, Dan Rutledge. We all went through that together, and to this day we still stay in touch almost on a daily basis. So that's been really great. While I was at West Point, I was on the crew team, the rowing team, for 4 years. So I had a great experience, and allowed me to kind of get a second group of really close friends, like Matt Gaffigan and Rich Ducote, Taylor Haynes, Mike Wagner, Sloan Mann, just some great folks. And so after that, I branched infantry. That was my really first choice. Due to my stellar class rank, I had 5 choices to go for branch night, and I picked Fort Benning, and that was great. That was really a great place for me to be. Was able to do airborne school, ranger school, Bradley leaders course, all the young lieutenant schools, and then go off to 3rd Brigade over on Kelly Hill and do my platoon leader and XO time over there.
Yeah, and I will tell you, those are some unique units, because like those guys at 3rd of the 3rd, man, they got whipped. And nobody realizes that, because they were like the support brigade. They did the rotations for NTC. They'd send guys to JRTC, and they constantly had that flow. And they were in the churn before the churn actually happened. Before we even started deploying, those guys were always going somewhere. So it was always like, the running joke when we were young in the Army is like, there's always a brigade from the 82nd deployed. Well, the fine print of that was there was always a unit from, 3ID doing something outside of what I don't think you would normally sign up to do, like, hey, we're going to have Bradleys. We're going to provide a Bradley platoon for the lieutenants in IOBC. I don't think anybody wanted that job.
In 2.5 years on Kelly Hill, I did 2 NTC deployments, a JRTC deployment, and they sent the battalion to Egypt for Bright Star when I was left behind on rear detachment.
Oh, wow.
Happily.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, plus you get all the post details and stuff like that. It seemed like we were just always in the field. It was great. It was good. Being a young single guy, that was great. And I was lucky that I was able to finish my last year actually back on main post Fort Benning, commanding the mortar school. So I got to do a company command.
Oh, wow.
Before I transitioned out, which was really great.
Yeah, and mortar guys, man. I tell you what,
different breed.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine. Like he's a '98 guy. He branched armor, And he was like, I don't know if I want to do infantry. I'll do armor or whatever. So he got the mortar platoon. Went to MLOC. After he went to MLOC and the mortar platoon, he was like, dude, like grunts are completely different types of people. And he went SF.
They're a little weird.
Yeah. He went SF and had a long career as a, special operations dude after hanging out with the mortar guys. And why? Because mortar dudes are weird and they're going to give you crap. But, so you alluded to your time at Fort Benning. So that was kind of like the first assignment, I guess, really. Mm-hmm. But then you also, the interesting note about you is you transition into the Coast Guard. So the first question is why? And the second question is, like, if you don't know, the Coast Guard really has some cool stuff going on, but you just don't really see it because it's like nautical miles away from the coast. Like legitimately, that's what they do is they guard the coast. There's a lot of things that go on. Super, super technologically advanced community. You wouldn't know it.
Yes, they are.
I think most people's impression of the Coast Guard is like the coasties that you had as exchange cadets, or the Guardian that we saw the lifeguard movie about the rescue swimmers. But the other aspects of what the Coast Guard does, like there's a lot of teeth in that organization. I mean, a lot of teeth, and it's a little known quantity. And I know these things because like I've gone down to talk to Coast Guard guys about the UAS problem. Hey, we're trying to guard a port of entry. And we got drones flying all over the place. We don't know where they're from,
Big problem.
And the other piece of it is it's a hazard. It's just like FOD on an airfield, like if I have something drift over and clip something and then I have a whole other mess that I have to deal with. So let's just keep it out of the area. But how was that for you being in the Coast Guard? Because I mean, not something that I would personally do because like after about the third or fourth time in a Black Hawk, I was done flying in helicopters. So I know like a lot of the external stuff that they do, like the pursuits and everything else with the boats and the helicopters and all those integrated, like they do joint operations. Basically, if you know the Marines, it's like a MAGTAF with a completely different mission set, but very, very important to the national defense. But I'll pause there and kind of let you elaborate because I think you probably have a lot more expertise in this area than I do.
Well, like a lot of things, you don't really know what you're getting into till you get into it. And I think you can apply that to West Point, to Ranger School, to transitioning out. Your first corporate job or your first civilian job, you don't really know what you're getting into until you get into it. But my main motivation was I just wanted to serve again. I got out in 2005, a little short-sighted, I think, looking back on it, 2020 vision. I wasn't having a whole lot of professional enjoyment in the peacetime Army. And I was already in the transition process when 9/11 happened. And, I had no, foresight to see where that was going. Or maybe I would have made a different decision or maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know. But I got out in 2002. And interestingly enough, a year later, I tried to come back in on active duty and they wouldn't let me.
Really?
Because at the very moment I was trying to come back in, the infantry was over its force cap for your Group 97 officers. And Congress, the invasions are just starting. Congress basically told the Army, no more people coming back in until you get under your number. So for a brief time there, I couldn't get recalled back to active duty and started looking at other options. And I was living in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I live now. I have 2 older kids, and that's where they were. And I wanted to be near them, so I started looking at different options. Where I'm at, there's a huge Coast Guard presence. Huge for the Coast Guard, I should say. It's such a small organization. Most people don't really realize how small it is. The New York Police Department is bigger than the entire global Coast Guard for the U.S. Yeah, it's a very, very small organization. But they had a program at the time where if you were a prior commissioned officer in a different branch, they would bring you in as a reservist. So I went through the reserve OCS, got commissioned. I had to drop down in ranks. I got out as a captain. I came in as an O2 in the Coast Guard, a lieutenant junior grade.
Wow.
And honestly, that was a great situation because I had no idea what I was really getting myself into. And the Coast Guard, kind of like the infantry, puts a ton of responsibility and trust into their 03 ranks. And I can get more into that, later talking about my career. But it was great. I was assigned to a port security unit. It was a great place for me to kind of go learn about being a Coast Guardsman. I did that for a little bit. In the meantime, I was working as a soft contractor for Northrop Grumman, kind of deploying all over the place with them. Did a couple stints in Afghanistan, some stuff in Eastern Europe. It was really fun. And then the Coast Guard was, at the time, the Coast Guard didn't even have their own intelligence program. After 9/11, they were trying to stand that up. They were not even a member of the intelligence community. One of those, they didn't have a seat at the table.
Wow.
So there was a recognized need for that. I didn't have intelligence experience, but part of the things that they were trying to do at the time was stand up a rapid deployment intelligence capability. I did have some rapid deployment experience from my time in the Army, my time as a contractor. So they recalled me back to active duty for a year.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted me to stand up this rapid deployment intel capability, primarily around SIGINT and human collections. And it was great. Just a tremendous experience. I worked out of the Coast Guard's Intel Fusion Center on Dam Neck here in Virginia Beach. And it was great. That was a 1 year recall, and 10 years later, they let me off active duty.
Oh, wow.
So and it was great. I was happy with the whole thing. The Coast Guard took great care of me, but it was definitely a totally different environment for being in the Army. And I know, listening to your podcasts before, you talk about kind of having to de-infantryize yourself. When you go to those first corporate job or first government job or whatever, first contractor job, and that was definitely the case for me. Yeah, I couldn't roll into the Coast Guard acting, like platoon leader Dullack or Ranger Dullack or any of that stuff. That doesn't fly. It's a military organization, but I would say its culture is much more like a government agency. And it was different. It was so small, and the caliber of people was just through the roof. Blew me away. I mean, I had enlisted guys with master's degrees. I had translators and linguists, Spanish linguists working for me that had pedigrees that blew me away. I'm like, I can't believe I'm leading these people. I can't believe I'm allowed to lead these people. And it was a different business model. Completely different way of doing things. I remember being a platoon leader. You come in out of the field. First thing you got to do, you got to get all your equipment cleaned, clear the arms room, pack your deployment bags, and then you can actually go home after your 2-week field problem or whatever. When I was a platoon leader, I'd have my girlfriend show up at my platoon command post with a half a keg of beer in a trash can. I'd put it in the middle of the CP and say, "Hey, when we clear everything, it's all yours, guys." We were always the first platoon to clear every single time.
Yeah.
If I tried that in the Coast Guard, they'd look at me and be like, "I'll buy my own beer. Why are we doing this?" It's just a different mindset, a different way of leading people. And it was great. It stretched me, and challenged me, and I loved it. It was really, really a great experience.
Yeah, that's interesting because, again, environment matters. And I think, we always want to think that, it's always easier to turn off certain parts of your leadership aspects than it is to turn them on. And that's one of the things that I always used to cautious, like Ranger students, lieutenants, when they're growing up in the Army, whatever. It's like, look, man, if you meet somebody that says, "Oh, I'll just turn it on when I get to my unit," you've already failed.
Nope.
Right?
Nope. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. You're going to fail. And that's the same thing when you get into a new environment. So if you're like, "Oh, I'll just turn on my leadership once I get there, and kind of figure out the lay of the land, and then I'll be okay." And it's like, it's possible, but that's usually unlikely. And particularly when you're looking at, the intelligence field, anything that deals with signals intelligence, you got to be smart, whether that be on the external side as an EW guy, just doing detections, or on the internal side, decrypting and demodulating. Like, both of those require a level of skill and a level of communication that you don't normally see, and definitely an infantry platoon, like, hey man, just go over there and do this. Shoot that guy.
Right.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Hand and arm signals, that does it. But when you're dealing with an invisible enemy or something that is tangible but not physical, it makes it a lot more difficult when you come to narrow that down. So it's interesting to see that you, went into an environment that, is kind of playing out of position. But yeah. I think for the most part, you could say that for everybody over the last 20 or so years with, the whole global war on terrorism and then defending the homeland aspects of it, everything is kind of turned into how do I play out of position? And, the upside of being in a federal agency is you've got a better budget. Now imagine trying to do those same kind of those difficult missions with, a local salary like a police department or a sheriff's department. Those guys have the same requirements. Those needs are there to do, intel collection, work human sources, do, decryption, encryption, utilization of technical exploitation of devices. All that stuff is very important for their jobs as well, but they don't have the budget. And oh, by the way, they have this thing called, the Fourth Amendment that prevents them from doing certain aspects of it without a warrant. And so there's a lot that goes into being able to do those operations. And I'm assuming that they, were a little bit more difficult. And again, the question that I would ask, just being a nerd, is, when you hit 13 nautical miles, did the rules change? Or was that a completely different organization that took part of that battle space?
So it depends on who we're working for, because the Coast Guard could fall under two different authorities. We could fall under Homeland Security authorities, or we could fall under Department of Defense authorities. For example, one of my last jobs I had, I was the program manager for our patrol forces in Southwest Asia. We have a number of cutters over in Bahrain. They help patrol and help support the Navy over there, and they are completely under DoD authorities. However, we do retain the things we're good at, like boarding, search, and seizure. So that's a lot of what we do over there to help the Navy, because that's not necessarily something they are, it's not their bread and butter. Whereas the Coast Guard, board, search, and seizure, we do that every single day, all over the place. And you don't need the Coast Guard. We would do operations with some of the other agencies like Customs and Border Patrol to drive them crazy. Coast Guard doesn't have to have probable cause to search and seize. Yeah. If it floats, we can search it. It doesn't work like that for every single other agency. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on whose authorities we're working under. And the one thing the Coast Guard does have that I was always continually impressed with was the level of legal scrutiny prior to an operation, to make sure everything we were doing was above board, everything we were doing, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and that it can hold up into a court of law, because you got to make sure you can prosecute, or what's the point of what you're doing? Yeah, and I think the law enforcement side of it was a little more complex from the legal side, making sure we were doing what we were allowed to do, not just what we thought we could do.
Yeah, and I was going to say that seems like the most compelling part of the work too, is because people always say, and you hear civilians that don't know anything about military law enforcement or anything like that, well, we can just, get a platoon of the 82nd to go down there and police this up. Like, no, that would be bad, because if I turn a platoon of grunts loose on the population, somebody's going to get killed, because that's their mission. So I want people that have the ability to do law enforcement when it's time to do law enforcement. And I need people that can go on objectives and prosecute targets in the manner that, Rangers, infantry dudes, SEALs, all that other stuff can do. But there's some nuances there, and, not getting into the specific titles, but there's nuances between, the Homeland Defense titles, tactical DoD titles, and then strategic intelligence. And so we'll kind of leave it at that. Most of our audience is intelligent enough to know what we're talking about, so we'll just kind of dust over from the next one. But so you said you did 10 years. Geez, man, 10 years on a 1-year recall, which is kind of that's a pretty cool extension, if you do say, if I do say so myself. So when you transition out into retirement, like what was that thought process like? Were you just like done? Did you want to spend more time with family, or were you just like, I've done my time, I've did my service, it's time for me to leave? I think there's usually a mixed bag, but kind of try to get your angle on why you departed service.
I think for everyone, of course, it's different. And sometimes, when you do finally depart service, it's kind of like the 5 stages of grief. You go through different phases. Some people get out because they're done. They're cooked. Like they've given everything they can, and they are ready to move on to the next thing. That wasn't my case. I was ready to continue. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard didn't see it that way. Yeah. I was not promoted to 05. And I kind of did it to myself. As a reservist, one of the major things in the Coast Guard that they want is they want to be able to recall you for national emergencies. Hurricanes, whatever. I did so much active duty, and it wasn't like the Coast Guard twisted my arm. I loved it. I would have stayed on active duty forever. I got to the point where because of my Army time and my Coast Guard time, I had so much active duty as a reservist that I was reaching sanctuary soon. And what that means is, for those that don't know, is if you're a reservist and you hit 18 years and 1 minute of active duty time combined total, by law, they have to let you go to 20 and get an active duty retirement. No. So I had, 16 and a half years, and there's a waiver process you have to go through, and eventually the commandant of the Coast Guard himself has to sign your orders. So, I kind of ran my own runway out. So it wasn't surprising. It was a little disappointing. I'm sure I was ready to keep serving, but all things happen when they're supposed to happen. And I'm very much at peace with my career. I'm very much at peace with what I got to do. I got to do some really cool jobs, and I got to have some really amazing experiences. And on the personal side, at the same time that was going on, my wife was accepted into med school, and she was accepted into med school in California. I'm in Virginia. So we were going to do a 2-year geo batch while she was doing her school. And it just worked out the way it should. There's no way, because we have a 4-year-old, there's no way I could do all that and try to manage, a reserve career on the side, plus my regular job, plus my 4-year-old, plus I have 2 grown kids, one in college, one about to go to college. So, it was the right thing to happen. It just took me a little while to see that. Yeah. And I think that's the challenge a lot of us have is, a lot of times things that are happening, not necessarily to us, but in our lives are happening because it's the right time for it to happen. Yeah. And that was absolutely the right time for me to say, you know what, it's been great. I'm done.
Yeah. I think there's a season for everything, and I think that's part of it. That was part of the reason why after, being where I was in the Army, it was like, let me do this EW thing. Like, at first I was like, these guys got to be crazy. Like, why are you asking Rob to do electronic warfare? I was a systems major at West Point. That means nothing about doing EW, zero. And then I talked to one of my mentors, and he was like, dude, you should do it, because he was an old Intel guy that went to electronic warfare. And he's like, look, what they need you for isn't your technical expertise. They need you for your operational expertise. So I was able to bring that operational flavor to an organization that needed it and operationalize it. And oh, by the way, I was the EWO for the 82nd. So when I show up as the EWO for the 82nd with a Ranger Tab and Master Wings, the conversations with the commanding general were much, much easier than, the kid with the first calf patch, bald snow cone, and a cab. It's a dynamic. And that's one of the things that I part of the reason why I started in the podcast is like, hey, look, just because you look a certain way or act a certain way, you still have to be adaptable. And I think that's the most important part about being a retiree is not the aspects of what you used to do. Like, cool, do everything that you can while you're in uniform. So you have the coolest shadow box ever. So when your friends are over and you guys are, watching a football game or whatever at halftime, you can have a great discussion. But the reality of it is that's for you and the people that are closest to you. Because when you go into that office to interview for the first time, nobody really cares. I've had conversations with people that were like, hey, I see you've got this Army Commendation Medal. Like, why did you get that? Like, really, dude? Like, that's like, because they see commendation and they think that's a big deal. But in the grand scheme of, the 87 different, pieces of flair that you have on your chest, it's just an award, Yeah. And so it's being able to translate that into usable things for the commercial environment, or even if you're working from home. And one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do, like if you're officer, enlisted, I don't care, look up the Small Business Administration in your area and start your own LLC. Like, why? Because then you can start writing off a lot of things on your taxes that you wouldn't normally do. So you take a trip and you talk to somebody about your job, you can write off part of that trip. Those are things that you can do. Your accountant will help you, of course, find a CPA. That's the other part. And there's lots of people that can help you with that. But at the end of the day, when you transition out of service, it's really just being able to translate what you did to make yourself usable to the other audience, and you've had to do that, transitioning from the Army into the Coast Guard, because that's a pretty big deal,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's no doubt in my mind that that's not a culture change. It's kind of like going to a sister service school at any point while you're in the uniform. It's like, oh, you're going to the Air Force or you're going to the Marine Corps classes, and you're like, okay, well, this is a completely different culture from what I'm used to. Language is different. Still means the same at the end state is the same. But as far as the personal development or the language that's used or utilized throughout the construct, it may be a little bit different. But, so, you kind of realized everything was coming to an end. You transition out. You've got your kids at home. One kid in college, wife's in medical school. Geez, like overachievers.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Life is great, but man, it's 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. And I think that's like, look, and I say this all the time and people laugh at me, but it's true. Sharks die if they stop swimming, and there's just certain people that are like that, and it's not everyone. It may be for you today. 5 years from now, you might be like, hey, I'm just going to sit on the couch and chill. I just want to go fishing. It could be that easy. And that's the other part of it, is just developing who you want to be in retirement. I tell people all the time, it's like, I'm close enough to Fort Bragg. Like literally they're doing exercises right now. I have Apaches flying over my house. I get to see the occasional C-17 and C-130 coming on a flight pattern over Sicily. But I'm far enough away that when that 0300 alert comes out, or that red Corvette, or these kids get blown out to go somewhere, like I literally watched like 4 deployments since I've retired from the 82nd, because they got sent to Poland. They've been sent to, all these different places throughout the world. And it's like, well, I'm really glad that I don't have to go there, because that would be another 6 or 8 months away from home, and that's
some things you miss and some things you don't.
Yeah. I absolutely miss the people and, the experiences that I had. I would love to jump. I probably still could, but I think that would be a discussion that would go down in the family line for a while, because there is the Liberty Jump Team. So there's a group of guys that jump here, and they jump all over the country. So they got the round parachute team, and then they have the Liberty Jump Team. And so these guys basically throw on World War II stuff and fall out of airplanes, which is
good on you. I got that out of my system when I was in the Army.
Bonkers. Well, I've always chased silk, so that's just the way that it is. But I've enjoyed it. But yeah, and so as you were transitioning, was there anything that you ever found interesting on your way out the door? So, I always ask everybody, like, was there a book or a resource or just a person, anybody that kind of helped you along your journey of transitioning out?
So I'm not a real big book person. I do think books are great, and there's lots of resources, in print for transitioning out. But I think the thing I tell folks who are getting out or who are transitioning, who ask, hey, how was it, or what would, what sage advice do you have? I think it's important to realize that of course, your network is going to be very, very important. And it's a network that you intentionally or unintentionally developed during your time in service. But what I've realized, especially with my last job that I just got, and I can talk about that in a minute, is your network, including yours, Rob, mine, anybody else's, your network is so much bigger than you even think it is. You have, when we talk about network, we think about people we have personal relationships with, or people we've professionally worked for or worked with. But your network, when it comes to getting out and finding that next step of your life, opening that next chapter, that network itself is so wide you have no idea. I mean, it extends to people you served with, people who served in the same unit as you even when you weren't even there, people you went to school with, people who just happened to go to the same school as you. And I'm not talking about just West Point, because ROTC graduates have great networks as well. And OCS folks have great networks as well. If you're an OCS graduate, you already have a giant network of anybody who ever graduated OCS, because that's not a fun experience. Yeah. And it brought you together, just like, our Beast Barracks and Plebe Summer and the 4-year meat grinder we went through brought all of us together.
Yeah.
So that network is wider and bigger, and don't be afraid, because it's hard to put yourself out there, but don't be afraid to search within that wider network to help you get your next job. And I'll use myself as an example for that. So I just started a new job about a month ago. I work for DFAS. No, I can't fix anybody's pay. So I worked I got hired by DFAS. I'm excited. I really wanted to get a 100% remote job.
Yeah.
Given my personal situation, that just would make life a lot easier. And so I found a great job I was interested in with DFAS, but I don't know anything about the organization. And so I got on Sallyport, the AOG app that shows you can do all kinds of great filtered searches through there for graduates by year, graduates by industry, graduates by location, actual specific companies. It turns out there was a guy who graduated a few years after us. We weren't there when he was there, but he was a senior exec in DFAS. So I just reached out to him like, hey, you don't know me, I don't know you, but this is me. We went to the same school. I'm West Point grad. I'm really interested in a position with your with your organization. Can we talk? And whenever you reach out to somebody like that, read between the lines, you're hoping for some sort of a recommendation or a push of a resume or something. We talked, we hit it off. He was a former special ops guy. We knew a couple people in common. And he ended up pushing my resume, not just to the hiring manager, but to her boss as well. Wow. And I'm not saying that's what got me the job, but gosh, I'm sure it helped.
Yeah, for sure.
I still to this day have never met this gentleman.
Wow.
I haven't. In fact, he left DFAS right after I got hired. I don't even know what he's doing. Yeah. But that's still what I would consider part of my network or my available network.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, if folks can broaden the aperture of what they consider their network to be, there's so many people out there that want to help you. So many people want to help you. Yeah. I mean, Rob, what if somebody you didn't even know from the 82nd, from the battalion you were in, sent you an email and said, hey, sir, I'm trying to get into this company and I heard you worked for them. Wouldn't you help them?
Yeah.
Or at least do your due diligence to see if they're worth helping. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. And I think that's very, very important point. So you said something that I always have recommended, and I tell people all the time, like, look, if you're not a LinkedIn person, start. 2 things I will tell you about LinkedIn. The first part of it is do not put, open to work on your profile. That just screams desperation. You can be looking, but you can put those settings in there where it's not public. You can have all the recruiters with the recruiter features looking for you, and they'll help you find a job. But the other part of it is be active on it if you're pursuing something. And what I mean by that is, like, I built my LinkedIn network on night shift. When you're the night battle chops for all these different organizations, guess what? You got time. So every day I was on shift, I would connect with one person that I served with previously, either senior or subordinate, or somebody in a career field that I wanted to connect with. And so if you do that 3 a day for a year, that's 1,000 contacts. Yeah. And I'm not saying that you have to be that aggressive, but you absolutely can, write recommendations. Go to Sallyport, which is another resource. There's so many different resources out here that if we, just listed them all, we'd be here for like 17 hours because there's so many different organizations. And also, don't forget to look regionally, because there's probably a regional hub that's doing some work with veterans in your area. Like North Carolina is great because we have a gal, her name is Noelle McCall, and she started a veteran transition program called Patriots Path. And the difference between Patriots Path and sfl-tap is about 300 people. So when you go to sfl-tap, you're sitting in a classroom with 150, 200 other people. When you go into Noelle's program, you're getting all the same touch points as you would through TAP, but 15 people are in the class, 17. The most she's taken, I think, is 21. And that's because she has a couple virtual folks. But what she does is it's basically she hits all those critical tasks that you have to go through sfl-tap, but she does it locally with 15 or 20 people inside, a classroom. And so you're getting that human interaction that you don't normally get when you're the distant, the far back chair in the, in the dean's office or whatever, or during the actual sfl-tap program. So just being able to connect with people in that way is also important too, because there's lots of local and regional people that can help. Don't forget your state employment offices. There's so many people that are just willing to help veterans achieve stuff. Don't just think I have to go to the VA. If I have a bad experience in the VA, I'm never going to find a job, or no one's going to help me, because that's
and I think it's important to remember too. Whenever your transition point is, you're not the first person that's ever transitioned.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk to people, ask questions. Ask people that have gotten out. Hey, what do you wish you had known before, you took your first job? I wish I had known how much healthcare cost.
Yeah.
With kids and everything.
For real.
Coming off of active duty the first time.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. I was like, I am a very poor person right now.
Yeah.
So all those things. There's a myriad of things. I've always been a big proponent of talking to people who've done it before and learning those lessons. And books are great. Books can help you kind of get those thoughts in line.
Yeah.
But talk to folks and reach out and broaden your network. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, there's a guy that was on the podcast, and I always plug him because every time I turn around, he's winning some other award with the book that he wrote. So he's written a series of books called Mission Transition, and so that one's the one that's specifically for veterans. So Matthew J. Lewis wrote that, works for a big contracting company, and he's a reserve lieutenant colonel when he got out. So he wrote this checklist because he saw it in his own environment, like, hey, we have people that don't know how to onboard veterans because it's just completely different language, completely different lifestyle, and bringing those two communities together, corporate business and, the military, they go very well because there's a lot of unknowns. If you're in the right business, it's like, hey, look, like we need you to go stand up this office in the middle of nowhere. Well, guess what? Most military people have done that before. Hey, we need you to go stand up this fob in the middle of nowhere, particularly over the last 20 years. With little oversight, and we're just going to keep throwing, bodies and money at the problem until you fix it. And that's an aspect of our culture. But the other aspect of our culture is, and I say this all the time, it hurts me when I see the Army pursuing, diversity, inclusion, and equity and all these other things, not because of any other reason than like, I have never looked over my shoulder and been like, whew, I really hope that white guy covers my back in this firefight. Never once said that. Never once said that. Never. And the fact that we are turning our military into something that thinks that way is disheartening for me. I don't think that like on the ground units that are in the middle of in the mix, they're not thinking that way, but it's sad to see that like the higher ups of the apparatus are thinking that way because it really takes away from, the connections that are literally made down at the platoon company, and I say this all the time as well. If you watch an organization, the 03s and below, those guys are just concerned about getting the job done. So if something comes down from higher that says, hey guys, we need to go do this 351 training. Everybody hates 351 training. Nobody in the Army likes it. Like, why? It's just a waste of time. It's like, look, I got to check this block so I can move on and go shoot my guns, and that's usually how it works. And seeing, both the corporate and the military environment kind of lean towards that, it's like, it's kind of a step backwards, to be honest. And it's frustrating to watch. And, I will help anyone. If you pick up the phone and you say, hey, I need some help, I'm not going to go to your LinkedIn profile and screen it and say, oh, that guy's the wrong color. Phooey, I'm not helping him. Or he doesn't have the right background, so I'm not going to help that guy or gal.
I think it's important in the job search, that you emphasize. I think let me think how to phrase this. So, very few of our jobs we've ever had in the military have we been properly trained for, or in some cases trained at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that a lot of veterans kind of either don't realize or just don't accentuate in the interview process. Is, it's okay if you're applying for a job you're not 100% qualified for. You've never done a job you've been 100% qualified for. You've probably never done a job you're 50% qualified for. That's why there's break-in. That's why there's, right seat riding. That's why there's all those different things, because the military is going to arm you with different skill sets, but not necessarily a lot of skills, specific. So emphasize that in your interview that, one, you've been successful in everything you've done. Two, you've never been trained in anything you've ever done. And that those go a long way in interviews, because most interviews, they're looking, if you're sitting in front of someone who's interviewing you, they've already decided that you are qualified for the position somehow, because they're not going to waste their time interviewing you.
No.
They're looking to see if you're the right fit. They're looking to see if you're going to mesh with the culture of that organization. They're looking to see if there's any big red flags. If you're, some giant, what, that they don't really want to find out after the hiring process. So, don't underestimate the fact that most of us in the military have OJT'd it
for a long
lot.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
some
think,
level for just about every job.
yeah. And I think it's one of the things that you can take with some assurance is like, hey, look, it's being comfortable with the unknown, and I think that's
a great phrase to use. That's a great phrase to use.
And that's a big difference between, like if I'm talking to a hiring manager that's in their early 30s, so why should we hire you for this job? Well, I don't know, other than the fact that like I'm here, I'm qualified, I want to do this, and I'm willing to learn and grow with you. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of veterans that I see have problems with. Either they go in, they ask for too much money, like I had a conversation with a colleague the other day. And I was like, hey, I know this guy, he's about to retire. He wants to work in startups and he wants a $200,000 salary. I said, well, he's never going to work in a startup if he wants a $200,000 salary because startups don't have $200,000 salaries. So like, that's a wrap. You might as well.
They're paying you in equity.
Yeah, exactly. They're paying you in equity and a wing and a prayer that you can land the plane at some point,
Right.
But it's like, hey, if you have those type of qualifications where you feel the need that you should be compensated in that much, guess what? You're probably heading towards one of those bigger contracting organizations. Well, I don't want to work in those big contracting organizations. Well, then you're kind of a crossroads, and a lot of people self-identify on the way out of why they can't find a job. Sometimes it's literally just finding something part-time to offset the income that works,
Sure.
And I think for a lot of us, that hit the ground running and we're on the street doing crazy things for most of our career, it's like kind of okay with the peace and quiet. I'll take a virtual meeting once a week or, every other day or something like that and knock some stuff out. But at the end of the day, it's not about, developing that strict, rigid military routine. Like I did that. I want to do something else, and I think it's kind of when you get to that point, that's really when you need to start thinking about transitioning as well. So it's like, tired of getting up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, having my coffee, going to do PT, and then, knife fighting with the freaking division staff over mouse turds. Like, I'm done with this, and that usually is like, when you finally say that to yourself, that's your time to go. And so again, it can happen intentionally, it can happen unintentionally, but either way, it happens. And then, we'll wrap this, but the thing that I do want to point out is like, is there any, veteran service organizations or anything in particular, like community activities or something that you would like to plug? Because again, I think tying into your community as a retiree or as a veteran is important, but, there's always more that we can do. And that's a way that if you are afraid that you are not going to be able to serve in retirement, that's a way that you can serve in retirement. But I'll leave the floor open for you if you have any thoughts or comments on that.
No, Rob, I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of speak for just a second. I'm not tied to any specific organization, but I'm pretty active in the substance abuse recovery community here in Virginia Beach. But we have a lot of military in the area. It's a lot of Navy, lots of Navy around, and so I'm tied in pretty tight with those folks. And it mirrors kind of my own journey. We all have ups and downs in life. I'm in my mid-30s. I hit absolute rock bottom as an alcoholic. Just my whole life fell apart. Checked myself into rehab, got healthy again. I've been sober for 11 years, and life is fantastic. I am so happy and grateful with where I'm at right now. But I think if I could leave our listeners with one thought, it would be don't be afraid to reach out for help, because people are out there who want to help you. As guys, we're not wired to ask for help. We just aren't, especially, when you've done the stuff that you've done, Rob, or some of the things I might have done. And, we just, we live by a creed that says, surrender is not a Ranger word. So asking for help is a really, really tough thing. We just gut it out. And that doesn't always bode well for us, for our mental health or other things. So don't be afraid to reach out. I'm always available. I don't care who you are. You can reach out to me. I'll help you. I'll talk to you. I'll point you in the right direction of resources. But there's a lot of organizations, and you'd be surprised how many people want to help you if they know that you need it. I know when I hit rock bottom, one of our classmates called out of the blue just to see how I was doing. And, my marriage was dissolving. My job was a mess. Everything was wrong. Mm-hmm. And the next morning he was on a plane, and that afternoon he was knocking on my door. Wow.
Wow.
That's the kind of people that all of us as veterans we have. Somewhere we've got those battle buddies, those folks we've served with, those people we went through the shit with, that we deployed with, that we fought with, that we, did mandatory duties with. Those folks are there. Don't be afraid to reach out for help because folks want to help you.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a short list of people I know that if somebody needed to disappear, I could text them or call them and be like, hey, man, maybe it's me that needs to disappear or maybe it's somebody else.
Right.
But from a perspective of just being able to be tied into that community, and I appreciate you being so open about your situation and helping people because, again, the legacy that you leave is more important than, the medals that you have on your chest. And that was one of the things that I've always tried to teach people. It's like, look, yeah, you're only as good as your last patrol, but your last patrol continues to move as long as there's people behind you that you served with that continue to serve with distinction. When you run into your old soldiers again, or you run into, a classmate or a teammate or somebody that's still doing well, and you had a small part of it, because you're not going to be the ultimate answer because they still made decisions and still had life situations that happened to them. But if you were that person that like, hey, I'm calling this guy because I know Steve's going to be the dude that's going to, say, nah, man, you're not on the right track, or like, nope, sounds like you got it. Those types of touch points are critical to everyone's success. And I think by having them, and like you said, not being afraid to reach out. And I say this all the time too, even, therapists go to therapy. So
right.
If you,
for sure, you're so right.
So if you're not willing to step outside of yourself to get the help that you need, like you could be out there struggling on your own and there's no reason to. I mean, there's tons of people out there that are willing to help. That's part of the reason why we do this podcast. Hey, if it brings any one person a piece of information or solace, then we've done our job. And that's ultimately what it boils down to.
And just on kind of a last parting thought is, the challenges that a lot of veterans have with dealing, with what they went through in combat is because most people don't go through combat. They don't know what you've been through. They don't understand how hard that is or what that toll that took on you. And that's why they say that, sometimes a veteran helping a veteran is the best thing out there. And that's how substance abuse recovery works. You're working with folks who've been there and they get it.
Yeah.
Nobody else might get it, but they get it.
Yeah. And I think that's really, it goes back to community or finding your tribe. And we say this all the time, you hear it all the time, but when you're around other people that, everybody's situation is a little bit different, but when you're in a group of people, when they're going, yeah, kind of been there. Yep, I got it. I understand what you just said. People that understand and it resonates with them, then you're probably in the right place. And if you go into an organization, whether it be a veteran service organization, the VA, your church, any other group that's out there, and you kind of get that feeling that like these people don't get you, then it's okay to move on and look somewhere else. And I think that's one of the things that the military teaches you is you suffer through the suffering. And you don't say anything or you don't make any changes. But like once you take the uniform off, you have a lot more latitude and you don't owe anybody anything. And the best thing that you can do is be the best person for your family and for the people around you. So if it requires you to, shift or change direction, that's okay. Nobody's going to judge you for that, at least not from this chair. But hey, we're going to wrap this thing up. I'm Rob Robinson from Philosophy from the Frontline. This is the Big Bites and PMI edition. Steve Dullack, thank you so much for jumping in on the breach on this today. We appreciate you coming on, telling us your story, and we're going to plug this. So if you are in the class of 97 and you don't want to get on this podcast, we are going to guilt you until you do, because we know that there's some tremendous stories. There's a few people that I'll kind of wait 3 or 4 years to get because they have to retire. But then there's other folks that are like on the street, like you and like you and me, and can really tell their story and just inform the audience about just life in general, but also service and transition, because it's very, very important understanding, taking off the uniform doesn't have to be a tragedy. Sometimes it is for some people, but usually it should be a happy occasion because like you're getting parts of your life that you didn't normally have back. But other than that, we will wrap this up. This is the end of this episode, and we will talk to you guys next time, and we'll catch you on the high ground. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Philosophy from the Frontline with Rob Robinson. We will bring you more interesting veteran transition stories, veteran advocacy, and more information in veterans transition in general on a podcast platform near you. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.